Let's now move on to the issue or the concept of cultural orientation in human development. This is where we encounter these concepts, individualism and collectivism. Alam nyo ba, itong mga concepts na ito, it transcends different disciplines, not only in psychology. You can also read this in sociology, in anthropology, or even in political science. Pero, syempre, ang pinakamagandang gawin natin dito is we really understand what's the meaning of these two words. Okay? Individualism and collectivism, these are ways of seeing the world. In some textbooks, they consider these two as attitudes. Pero for the sake of our class, we consider this as ways of seeing the world. Paano natin tignan yung mundo? Okay? The way individualism looks at the world, very different from the way collectivism looks at the world. Ano nga raw yung mga main differences between the two? Kapag individualist ka, ganyan ang pananaw mo sa mundo. Kapag collectivist ka, ganyan na naman ang pananaw mo sa mundo. Very different. And I think the most basic difference here is the second bullet. In individualism, I, consciousness, ako. Individual expression. Collectivism is more on we, consciousness, tayo, kapwa, nature. Okay? So individualism more on the self, collectivism more on others. If you want the more specific differences, you just read this slide. You can just pause the video. Okay? So those are the two differences between those concepts. Another very important idea that you need to understand in relation to these two concepts is different countries have different levels of individualism and collectivism. Take note, they are not two different categories. Rather, according to anthropologists, according to those people who started this theory, individualism and collectivism are in a continuum. Diba? One end of the continuum, individualism, extreme individualism. The other end is extreme collectivism. So any country in the world is somewhere in between those two extremes. Some countries more individualist than collectivist. Some countries more collectivist than individualist. Take a look at this table. The following are the countries with very high levels of individualism. Yung medyo malapit na sila sa extreme ng individualism. United States, UK, Russia, Italy, surprisingly, Japan, Germany, France, Canada, most Western countries. Well, except Japan, no? Most Western countries very high in individualism. But remember, again, it doesn't mean they are not collectivistic in any way. They also possess a certain level of collectivism, but not as high as individualism. Kasi nga malapit sila doon sa extreme ng individualism. Another slide. Take a look at this. Ito medyo mas comprehensive ito, no? Who are the countries high in collectivism? Nandyan ang China, nandyan ang Korea, Taiwan, Singapore. Most ASEAN countries are high in collectivism. Pag nasa baba naman ng graph, more likely, mga individualist yan. Tulad nga ng sinabi natin kanina, USA, Australia, UK, mabababa yung kanilang mga levels of collectivism. But the same principle applies. These countries high in collectivism doesn't mean they are not individualist in any way. Meron din silang expression of individualism, hindi lang ganun kataas compared to their collectivism. Kasi nga, bawat country may level of individualism, merong level ng collectivism. Now, let's connect all these things to human development. What's the link between these two ways of looking at the world and human development? Guess what? How you see the world, whether more individualist or more collectivist, will affect cultural practices in that country, which will affect the trajectory of people's human development. I hope you see the connection. Kung ano yung pananaw mo sa mundo, individualist man yan or collectivist na yan, meron niyang epekto sa mga ginagawa sa isang country na may epekto sa development ng mga tao sa bansang iyon. Let's talk about parenting. Parenting is a universal experience. Walang country ang walang parent. Correct me if I'm wrong. Tama ba? Or kung baka may kakilala kayong country na Sa country na yun, walang parent, i-comment nyo sa baba. But definitely, parenting is universal. But the way parenting is done, the specific ways how it's done, that's not universal. That's highly cultural. Like for example, in most ASEAN countries, in Asian countries, which are very collectivistic, different ang parenting style dyan kumpara sa mga Western countries. They have different ways of parenting their children. Like how? Let me read to you some excerpts from a journal article that talk about parenting and culture. The traditional Japanese mother considers childhood to proceed in the opposite direction, from independence to dependence. By the way, in the context of this article, they consider Japan to be very collectivistic. So, ang training daw sa mga bata, kapag ang parents mo ay nasa Japanese culture is from independence to dependence. In Japan, the newborn baby is viewed as a separate autonomous whom the mother must socialize into becoming dependent on other members of the group. Keyword, dependent. Dependence. Shared identity. You blend with the group. Diba? Sa Pilipino na version, ito yung pakikipagkapwa. Ito yung pakikisama. After all, ang Pilipinas, highly collectivistic tayo just like Japan. So, ganyan ang practice ng parenting if your parents are Asian in descent, practicing Asian culture. Iba naman yan sa Western parents. American mothers tended to concentrate on their children's cognitive abilities and used words like intelligent, smart, and imaginative, but also made more frequent references to their independence and self-reliance. Sa madaling sabi, Western parents, they enhance the individuality of the son or daughter. Ang ine-emphasize, ang ina-highlight yung kanyang self-existence. Iba ka, unique ka, you focus on your strength. Hindi mo kinakailangan maging katulad ng iba. You should make yourself unique and you should be proud of that. Hindi ganun ang value kapag nasa collectivistic culture. I hope you can see the difference. So, again, going back to that idea, the way or what kind of culture you belong to, individualist or collectivist, will affect the way you practice parenting, which will affect the trajectory of the development of the offsprings. Sons man yan or daughters. Wala pa dyan yung co-sleeping. Another good example. In Western societies, babies have their own rooms. In Asian societies, very collectivistic, common practice, babies sleep within the beds of their parents. O, diba? And there are now many articles showing that the development of these children are very different from each other. Iba ang development ng mga babies na lumaki na may sariling kwarto. Iba rin yung development ng mga babies na lumaki na kasamang matulog yung mga parents. Iba sila ng emotional responses, iba sila ng interpersonal reactions, interpersonal skills, magkaiba rin sila ng emotional intelligence, so on and so forth. All these differences can be explained by the differences in parenting practices na nanggagaling nga sa cultural differences. Kaya nga, one very hot debate in human development research is the universality of parenting styles. Western literature will flood you with different articles saying na ang pinakamagandang parenting style is authoritative parenting. Balance of love and discipline. Pero, some cultural psychologists are now questioning this. Maybe, authoritative parenting is the best parenting style in the West, but not in all cultures. Baka merong ibang mga kultura, mas maganda ang development kapag authoritarian. And there are studies showing that. Na ang mga bata mukhang mas maganda ang development when they experience authoritarian parenting more than authoritative parenting, which is in contradiction to what the literature is saying on parenting, na botong-boto sa authoritative parenting. Baka nga may ibang kultura pa, although I'm just hypothesizing, no? Baka nga may ibang kultura pa, ang pinakamagandang parenting sa kanila, permissive parenting. We don't know. So when we consider the role of culture in human development, we begin to question the universality of certain DevPsych principles. Yung mga pinag-aaralan kasi nating mga DevPsych principles, karamihan, according to critics of human development, these are principles coming from Western research. And most principles that we study coming from Western research, we assume it's universal. But now you are aware of the role of culture in human development, dapat magiging maingat tayo in assuming universality of principles. Totoo ba na ang authoritative parenting is the best parenting style? Or maybe that depends on the culture. Diba? This is where you need to appreciate the contribution of this guy, Yuri Bronfenbrenner, na gumawa ng kanyang bioecological theory. Basically, ang sinasabi lang ng theory niya, if we want to further understand or accurately understand human development, we need to go beyond the internal factors of development. Huwag tayo puro nakafocus lang sa genes ng bata, sa heritability, although it's important to consider those things. But there are more external factors outside the developing person that we need to focus. At hindi lang pamilya yan. Kasi may mga developmental psychologists, okay, sige, tumingin tayo sa labas, mag-focus tayo sa pamilya, the family dynamics. How does that affect human development? I'm not saying it's wrong. Bronfenbrenner is not saying that's wrong, but he wants us to go beyond the family, beyond the community. Gaano ba kalayo? Ganyan daw dapat ang tingin natin sa human development. No? Tignan natin yung microsystem ng bata, yung mesosystem ng bata, exosystem, macrosystem, chronosystem. The more you analyze those external factors in relation to a developing person, the more accurate your analysis would be on a person's development. At pag-aaralan natin yung theory ni Bronfenbrenner na yan as we go along this subject. So, ang gusto ko lang makita nyo dito, appreciate what this guy contributed in terms of how we should analyze human development. Hindi lang pala dapat lagi tayo nandito sa child at sa microsystem. Dapat talagang lahat ng external forces out there, meron niyang epekto sa human development. In fact, itong chronosystem na ito, ano ba itong chronosystem? Historical period. In which part of human history did you grow up? Merong epekto yan sa human development. Iba ang development ng bata na lumaki during World War II at ang bata na lumalaki sa isang society na kinukonsider nating technological na. And that makes sense. That's Yuri Bronfenbrenner. Kaya nga, another field in psychology na close ang human development is cultural psychology. So, tatlo na silang magbabarkada, no? Human development, very close with positive psychology and cultural psychology. Nag-uusap-usap yung mga yan eh. So, if you are a human development major, o di ba meron tayong isa na human development major, application, kailangan meron kang textbooks niyan. Tatlo. Human development, positive psych, and cultural psychology. You read these textbooks and then you interrelate all the ideas for you to become a better developmental scientist. In relation to culture and human development, bigyan ko lang kayo ng mga possible areas of research. When we talk about culture in human development and you apply that in research, sikat na mga studies yung moderator studies. You're familiar with what moderators are, di ba? Moderators in research terminology are variables that will change the relationship between two psychological variables under it. Let's say, going to this diagram, let's select two psychological variables, variable A and variable B. We want to know how powerful predictor or how powerful variable A is predicting variable B. Diba? Simpleng linear regression yan eh. Now, in moderator studies, ang ginagawa natin is we want to see if the power of variable A in predicting variable B depends on a certain moderator. So, let's name the two psychological variables. Parental monitoring as a predictor of school achievement. Parental monitoring, gaano ka kadalas as a parent na tutukan yung bata sa kanyang mga daily activities. May kinalaman ba yon sa grades na nakukuha ng bata sa eskwelahan? You want to know if parental monitoring predicts school achievement. Pero kung papasukan mo yan ng moderator studies, there you go. We are assuming that the power of parental monitoring in predicting school achievement, mag-iiba-iba yan depende sa moderator na tinitignan. Let's name some possible moderators. We have religion, culture, or generation. But for the sake of example, in this class, let's select culture as moderator. Paano ngayon na magiging takbo ng pag-aaral na yan? Ganito yan. Diba? We assume now that the power of parental monitoring in predicting, in determining school achievement will differ depending on what cultural orientation are we talking about. Mag-iiba yung strength ng predictive power ng parental monitoring under individualist versus under collectivist. Ako ang hypothesis ko, no? Although I don't have data on this, but based on the theories that I'm reading in the literature, mas magiging powerful predictor ang parental monitoring sa school achievement under collectivistic cultures. Because that's the norm in collectivistic cultures. Parents' role is to really monitor whatever the child is doing in his or her life. Norm yun sa kultura natin eh. Sa individualist, hindi ganon. So when a child understands, kapag yung bata, ini-expect niya na ganun talaga sa kultura nila at ganun ang ginagawa ng parents niya sa kanya, then the take of the child will be very positive. My parents love me, that's why they're monitoring me. Therefore, I'm going to do my best in school. So they get higher grades. But you do that in an individualist country where they value privacy, where they value personal freedom. I don't think a Western child would take high levels of parental monitoring positively. Which will explain kung sa tingin ko bakit hindi masyado magta-translate yan sa school achievement. Or maybe, baka mag-translate pero negative ang correlation. Maybe more parental monitoring in the West, less school achievement. While higher parental monitoring in collectivistic culture leads to better school achievement. Again, that's my hypothesis. But you understand how moderator studies work. And the basic assumption, again, of moderator studies, if you select culture as moderator is, wala talagang universal developmental principle. Diba? Going back, hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na, parental monitoring, it's good for school achievement. Really? All cultures? Not necessarily. Diba? Yan yung magiging role ng cultural psychology in relation to human development psychology.